Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here today with three stalwarts who've played a very big role during the Kargil War. My former editor, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, who, as you all know, interviewed Nawaz Sharif in 1998 when Nawaz Sharif invited Prime Minister Vajpayee. 99 January, I stand corrected. He invited Prime Minister Vajpayee to visit Pakistan, and that led to the Lahore bus yatra. And as we know now, the soldiers of the Northern Light Infantry were already climbing Kargil when that happened. That's a question I want to ask Shekhar later on during our discussion. And of course, the Indian Express, which Shekhar was the editor of, outstanding coverage of the Kargil War. And I remember for the first time we saw satellite phones being given to journalists. My friend Gaurav Sawant was one of those privileged ones. And of course, we have General Lakhwinder Singh, whose book we are here to discuss, The Enraged Bull of Kargil, or Dras. As Raj Chengappa said, that he was using Bofors guns like rifles, in Kargil, in direct fire mode. And of course, my friend Nitin Gokhale, who's done some sensational stories out of Kargil that we still read 25 years later. But I want to start by asking General Lakhwinder, 26 years after Kargil, sir, why this book now? Why didn't you write it before?
I was not keen to write this book, but I have a very nagging wife and my children who forced me, you must write. And I said, nothing else for your own memoirs and own experience and what you felt there as a soldier, you must pen it down. And that's how I wrote this book.
Right. That's a short answer, and I think ma'am will be very happy with that. And it's always the woman behind the gun, sir, behind the man. Okay, right. And of course, it's the Russia-Ukraine war that has got us speaking about artillery. And one of my dear friends, General Ravi Shankar, told me that 2022, when the Russians started reeling back, he said, just wait for the Russian artillery to enter the picture. The picture will dramatically alter. And that's exactly what happened. The Russians were firing something like 20,000 rounds a day, without getting into the ethics of the war. But that's the kind of warfare that the Russians were fighting using artillery, because they were an artillery power and not an air power. But I want to ask Mr. Shekhar Gupta this. Shekhar, one of the big unanswered questions of 1999 was the Lahore bus yatra. 26 years later, do you still have some unanswered questions about the bus yatra, the Kargil war? Did Nawaz Sharif really know that Musharraf was pushing troops into Kargil and Koh-e-Paima had already been launched by the Pakistan army?
Look, this has been an eternal debate since then. In his own book, Nawaz Sharif claims that, Musharraf claims that Nawaz Sharif was in the picture, and it's a lie that Nawaz Sharif says he didn't know. However, Nawaz Sharif has repeatedly maintained that he did not know. I also recorded a two-part walk the talk with Nawaz Sharif in Hyde Park in London when he was in exile there. And he talked about this in great detail. I'd like to believe that he did not know, because if it was any other country, I would have said, how did the Prime Minister not know at least something? But in Pakistan, it's very possible. In Pakistan, the Prime Minister does not have the powers of a Prime Minister even in a quasi-democratic state. Because Pakistan's army, the GHQ, the establishment, they have their own universe. So they follow the need-to-know principle with the political leadership and usually use political leadership to be put in front, which is what happened in this case. Because ultimately, when the capitulation did take place, it is Nawaz Sharif who had to go and buy that loss of popularity by going to Washington on a 4th of July weekend. So I would be I would be more inclined to believe that he had no idea. And it's quite possible that he said, जी हम थोड़ा बहुत उधर कर रहे हैं जो हम LC पे करते रहते हैं, आपको कभी पता लगे तो आप घबराना नहीं. It's possible that something like that was said, but that he was told that we are infiltrating, we see an opportunity, there are some empty places, these will threaten India's artery, main artery, in fact, at that point, the only artery, the artery connecting to Siachen and to Ladakh, and to force India into a negotiation, etc., at least to get Siachen. I don't think, I'm quite sure he did not know this. Also, instinctively, and that's the reason he's not the prime minister now, his brother is. Instinctively, he's believed that there's a school in Pakistan, and I've heard this from some veterans, including a former air chief of Pakistan who was quoted on the record. He was the chief who resigned when Zia took over, and later was Pakistan's ambassador to the US also. And he used a line which I think a lot of people in Pakistan believe, which is that Pakistan, the sooner it gives up the notion that it can take any more of Kashmir through means military, diplomatic, or political, the better it is for Pakistan. I'd like to believe that Nawaz Sharif himself is of that persuasion, and right now whatever is happening should leave him very shattered.
Right, absolutely. And in fact, we were at a event just yesterday talking about the 1965 war. It's the 60th anniversary of the 1965 war, and that was Ayub's war. And Kargil was Musharraf's war. And Op Sindur, the run-up to that, is Asim Munir's war. So the point is that, you know, Pakistan has these generals who every couple of decades think that they are God's answers to Pakistan's problems. And each of them comes, takes power, and then leaves Pakistan in worse condition than they inherited. But Nitin bhai, Kargil 1999, as we were talking about this slow build-up to the Northern Light Infantry intrusions, there was tremendous chatter that was building up. Our intelligence agencies were picking up a lot of chatter. Of course, you didn't have the NTRO, you had RNAW, ARC was flying missions. And I just heard Vikram Sood speak at a podcast recently where he said there was so much of intel that we gave the army and it was all ignored. I thought he was exaggerating, but then I went back to the KRC report, and sure enough, there were so many pieces of intel there that said that, look, they're planning a military operation. You know, you've gone into great detail on the Kargil War, the failings which General Lakhwinder has also mentioned in his book. How bad was that intelligence failure? Was it a failure of intelligence or a failure of assessment?
I think the latter, the failure of assessment. There were bits and pieces of intelligence, information, and also chatter that was coming in. But there are two things one must look at: the context of the Kargil intrusions and what decisions were not taken or why nobody took it seriously. They were derived from a political bus yatra in Lahore. And I think the mistake, and I must say this bluntly, even if it's unpalatable to many people, I think the military leadership at that point in time also got taken in by this fact that India, Pakistan now have a bonhomie, a newfound friendship route. The Lahore bus yatra has ensured that there will be no bad blood between the two. And therefore, I think it was taken lightly. Assessment and collation was also missing. And of course, we didn't have the NTRO. The Vaso sorties were, I would think, indifferent. They were scattered and not very coordinated. The winter aerial surveillance, the sorties that happened. And of course, there was, the entire frontage was held very lightly. We had one brigade to look after a frontage of 120 kilometers. So even if the brigade commander wanted, we probably wouldn't have been able to go there because the unwritten convention was that you will vacate all the winter held posts at that point in time on both sides, and nobody will violate that unwritten understanding. There was a war game, let me remind everyone, I think General Mohinder Puri has written in his book, I think you have mentioned it, General Lakhwinder, in Srinagar, which was the Corps headquarters at that point in time, where General Brigadier Devinder Singh, who was later 70 Brigade Commander, had played the, the adversary. And he had actually raised the point that what if Pakistanis intrude into the Tiger Hill area or even the unheld areas of Dras and Mashko and probably Batalik. And he was dismissed, or he was not sort of taken seriously. So it's not as if people didn't have information or inkling or instincts. All that was there, but it wasn't put together. It wasn't sort of talked about. And because of this political overhang that it's all is well between the two countries after the Lahore Yatra, nobody took it seriously. And then when reports started coming in from the ground, again they were not taken too seriously. And I think there was another issue at that point in time. You had 15 Corps headquarters looking after the entire Jammu and Kashmir, including Ladakh, east of Zozila, which gets cut off. I mean, there was hardly any. I mean, now you have a Corps in Ladakh, but at that point in time it wasn't there. So it was all-encompassing, I would say, shortcomings and negligence and indifference that contributed to not getting the full picture of what was happening.
Plus, there was also the 1998 nuclear tests, and I remember Sir Ashley Tellis had written that piece in '98, where he said, now there's not going to be any war between India and Pakistan, because now they're both nuclear weapons powers, and nuclear weapons powers don't fight with each other, and that is exactly what Musharraf had possibly gamed, the fact that because you had a nuclear threshold, that would never be, there would be no conventional war fighting. But General Lakhwinder, so now back to Kargil, the Northern Light Infantry is entrenched. Your brigade is called into action. There was a lot of coverage around that time. I remember Indian Express, India Today, television. I mean, we've seen those fantastic visuals, but we didn't know about the role played by artillery until much later. I think somewhere around 2010, Manu Pabi is here. He broke that story for the Indian Express, which actually said that artillery had taken, the Pakistan army had come out with their casualty lists, and a very large percentage of them had been killed by Indian artillery shelling. Did you already know that your guns had played a very big role in 1999? How much of a wake-up call was it for you, that story, when it appeared in 2010?
So when we entered Kargil, and then Vendapur leading us, and we were at a very low morale. And there were, in the higher military leadership, there was a bit of apprehension that what do you do about this? That is how, when I want to quote you, and I want to digress a little bit from what you asked me, I want to quote how the artillery came to play this role. And I will take you back to a place called Toroling Heights. Now, it's a nondescript feature. It had a height of, I think, 4,500 meters, and it was overlooking Daras. Now there, before the division entered into arena to fight these infiltrators or the intruders, there was one battalion, 18 grenadiers, who had tried to dislodge them and capture those heights. Now, it happened on 20th May. They were not so successful. But they got a foothold, and they kept creeping up till they reached 200 meters from the enemy. Just 200 meters from the enemy. Not happy with their lack of success, the CO felt they should make some more trials. And there were two forays, one led by Major Adhikari and second by Colonel Vishwanath. And these brave hearts, very bravely, and the 18-year-old boys, they wanted to go and capture those features. But before these 100 meters, they were gunned down. On the starting point, which worried us, and my GOC in Puri, that if they can't cover 200 meters of this distance under fire, how will they cover 1,000 meters climb up the hills? You can stand, if a 6 feet tall man can stand and look at a feature at 15,000 feet, it was Neckel Creek. And they're so bare and so difficult. So that is the time we realized that we have to do something different so that the enemy is made irrelevant. And then how we start this concept. Now we went back to history. And we remember time of Ranjit Singh and Babur, where they used simple guns to fire in the face of enemy. So we thought, if they could do it, why not us? We have very good guns, and we have ample guns. It was for us to use those guns effectively. So every gun is has inherent capability of firing or direct firing. And what is direct firing? It's a fire when you see the target, like a rifle, and you can shoot at it. Most artillery is used for indirect firing. That's firing at 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, where it's the forward observer who guides the fall of shots and engages the target. So I said, why not we try this for longer ranges? And one fine day, we took 2 Bofors guns and 2 field guns at the base of Turuling, 4 kilometers away from Turuling, and we want to try to direct firing at long distances. So when we reached there, in a direct firing, the man who matters most is the man who lays the crossfire on the target. And then on top of it, we found a Barbad bunker, an aiming point. Now, the Barbad bunker had caused a lot of casualties to 18 units. It was really a killer bunker. So use that as the aiming point and put a best person on the gun, on the layered sheet. I cannot but call his real name Naik Avtar Singh. He was to become useful to us in many other places. He looked like a carpenter, but his hand was as steady as a surgeon. And when he went for first round, of course we had prayers on lips because the grenadier ball is sitting 200 meters from there. So we were trying it for the first time, and we fired the first round. It felt close, very close to the Barbad bunker, and second, third round squarely hit the Barbad bunker. Now we are very happy that we have achieved something good. But before we could try some other guns, enemy artillery started firing on us, and we go from there. But the results were so good that now we start framing up how do we tackle the enemy with so many guns that we got. And we had converted a dumb ammunition to smart ammunition. This was a game changer in Kargil Bofors, direct firing. Sometimes fired as long as 10 kilometers, 9 kilometers, and quite accurately. So we decided that we use all the guns that we have. We had 108 guns, plus a troop of multi-barrel rocket launcher. A multi-barrel rocket launcher is also known as Grad battery, which is hail of fire. It can fire 40 rockets before less than 40 seconds. So each barrel, 6 barrels can fire 240 rockets. And Bofors can fire 3 rounds in 12 seconds. So with this, we decided to fire the complete artillery on the target, one by one. And at one time, the 100 guns fired 3,000 kgs of steel and explosive on the target at one time. And therefore, less than 30 minutes, we were able to fire 1 lakh kgs, sorry, 1 lakh kgs of explosive and steel on the target, which totally annihilated this. Which nashta namood kar sakta tha. So that is the power of artillery that we wanted to use. So this idea came to us and we worked on it, and we tried it out for the first time at Turuling when the first feature, and I think General Puri did a very wonderful job of that. Because at that time our morale was so low, we decided that we must capture one feature to turn the tide. So we tried that thing on the night on 12 June. We were standing at the vantage point with the GOC, other officers, where 6 guns were firing on Turuling, and very accurately. And at night, 2 Rajif, when they start hotel hour, they want to start the attack there, the whole artillery opened up Turuling, and Turuling was absolutely lit with fire and smoke and thunder. The officer standing next to me was one Colonel David. His jaws dropped. He said, never seen such fire ever in my life. such good accurate fire and such devastating fire. So that was the effect of fire. That imagine 4 or 5 football fields firing 1,000 kgs of ammunition. So that's how we started firing. And Kargil, just to take your mind back, we fired 2,90,000 rounds. And gunners had a very tough time. Very tough time. Because when they're not firing, they were loading ammunition, unloading ammunition, preparing ammunition, and then, of course, when time came firing. Unlike the infantry people who had a very intense period of engagement, then there's some time to recoup and reorganize. Gunners had no time. And fatigued with lack of sleep, and the work, and the hands blistered, they kept on firing and never let the infantry down. Never. As a matter of fact, infantry came to swear by gunners. And one more thing, which is again not your question, but I think I should tell you here, that in terms of casualties, now this concept did wonders. We suffered 525 casualties, and Pakistan 727 casualties. Now, in an attack operation in the mountains, the casualty ratio is at least 1:6. That if a defender suffers one casualty, the attacker could lose 6 people. So if we were to interpolate that with the 700 casualties that Pakistan had, we would have lost 4,200 people. But we only lost 525 people. Now this fact is not, I don't know, it's missed the write-up in all journalists and also military history writers, but I want to quote something which a colonel's wife wrote to me, and I'll read that. And I think the best compliment I got in my life. General Lakhwinder, more than anything else, you may be having the greatest satisfaction of saving the lives of hundreds of our soldiers and reducing the duration of war. Please accept sincere congratulations on a stellar achievement once again. So this is what the artillery did, and to honor this grateful nation and the Indian Army, to honor artillery, named the highest point in Daras, point 5140. That point is, if you remember, you recollect Captain Batra, late Captain Batra, the PVC, who said, Dil mange more. That was named the gun hill. And with that, I've summed up what the artillery actually did. So,
the short reaction to that is, sir, I wouldn't want to be on the other side when you were firing any guns. You know, I think you've kind of summed up 1 lakh tons or 1 lakh kilos, or
every time we fired, all guns fired 1 lakh kgs of steel and explosive on an area of 4 to 5 football fields, sometimes less, sometimes more. So there was no way and Pakistan had no answer to it, but one of fear and despair. But in the same light, I must tell you, the Indian infantry can revere them as saviors. It was a pleasure to see infantry personnel, after sojourn, after victory on the hills, they were coming back to gun area and saluting the guns and paying obeisance to guns for saving their lives. They were so grateful.
I'm going to give you a short excerpt of what the other side thought of Indian artillery. But first I want to ask Shekhar this question about, Shekhar, we are in the middle of another operation, Operation Sindoor. It's an ongoing military operation. And you know, one of the criticisms of Kargil, at least my Air Force friends will bear me out, is that we were fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. We were not allowed to cross the LOC. And they said, how can you employ the Indian Air Force in such a restricted role? I mean, you know, there was a certain point when we were moving, when we came closer to the outer limit of the excursions, infiltrations, they had to pull back the Indian Air Force. And today, 25 years later, you see the Indian Air Force going in, launching attacks inside Pakistan's Punjab province, which we've not done in a long time. Do you think the Indian political leadership is now more attuned to the use of force in statecraft, or do you still believe that it is what you once wrote about India-Pakistan wars being, you know, communal riots with tanks and guns.
No, in fact, I had said that I said India-Pakistan wars so far have been professionally honorable. Both sides have not targeted civilians, and both sides have generally treated prisoners well. And both sides in their later history writing have been also complimentary of the other side. So soldierly chivalry has been there. So I in fact said that I hope the future wars don't become communal riots with tanks and fighter planes and nuclear weapons. So that's what I might have said. Look, first of all, it's not just a leadership issue. Leadership issue is important. But between 1995 and 2025, the military power differential between India and Pakistan is very different. Very different. Second, the Air Force, this is an eternal debate. Why was the Air Force not used in 1962? Right? So what is not done can be eternally debated. Now, we don't do scenario writing. What if air power was used in 1962 and the government's fear at that time that the Chinese had long-range bomber aircraft. And India did not have air defense ground environment system. That's the reason the Americans gave you your first radars, because India had no long-range radars. Because the fear was that the Chinese had the illusions and they could come and bomb your populated areas. Everybody had the memory of the Battle of Britain and then the demolition of Germany. So all that was very fresh in people's minds. And the Indian Air Force was strong in 1962, but not that strong. So it's like eternally now, there will be a debate on why was the Navy not used in Op Sindoor. And I got the answer, in fact, on NDTV, one of their, I think they had a defense conclave, where Admiral Arun Prakash made a very important point. He said, when you use the Navy, it takes escalation to a different level. Now, you say, why? Air Force is being used. He said, the fact is that the Navy will always operate from international waters. The Navy is not operating from your territorial waters. The Navy is not going into Pakistan's territorial waters. Navy will operate from very far out in international waters. So this is the next level of escalation. Do you really want it? Now, all these calls are political. Politicians' job is very tough. Politicians, civilian leadership, their job is very tough. They have to take hard decisions. And tomorrow, somebody will blame, aapne ye nahi karne diya, aapne wo nahi karne diya. Because in our system, and this is much more pronounced on the Pakistani side, say with Pakistan Air Force, especially, it's the psyche that they think they are fighting the Indian Air Force. They are not fighting for the larger cause. So every force thinks that my role, my credit, etc. In the latest one, Op Sindoor, now there's been so much focus on air warfare. That's also because the Pakistanis tried to confine it to air warfare, as they tried in 65 also, just limited air warfare, which 65 also did not turn the weight of the war in any way. Op Sindoor, 7 of the 9 targets were hit by Indian Army. And see the role of precision artillery there, the Excalibur rounds. You know, you have the name of a target written on the round, and from so far away, while your guns are so recessed and so safe, this round will go, and think of the indignity of those charged with protecting the target. Ki kambakt ek shell aa gaya. Pata you can't stop a shell, right? You can stop a missile, but you can't stop a shell. So what Op Sindoor has shown, in fact, is the utility of long-range precision artillery. And if you see how we've been procuring, see that these things are all procured in very small amounts, in very small numbers, in emergency procurement procedures. In my view, if you want to build a real deterrence with Pakistan for the next round, twice you've used the Air Force. You can't become predictable. Because even this time, Pakistan was expecting you to bring the Air Force, and they had made their own plans and they were ready. Next time, what will you do? Will you do the same thing again? So I would say if India has the money, India should now order not 100 guns at a time or 200 guns at a time. I'm saying it with a gunner and with lots of gunners here. India should buy 2,000 more guns, right? So Pakistanis should know that any time they open fire in Poonch Rajouri, their favorite area, if they open fire with 10 guns, they will be fired back with 300 guns, right? That is a deterrence. Again, you want to impose a deterrence, you don't have to risk aircraft, you don't have to give anybody the satisfaction of being able to fire at a high value target, at a capital asset, right? You can protect your capital asset and you can just, for the next round, if you just invest in long range precision artillery, that will be quite effective for the next round. And that's why this book is also significant, because this reminds you what you can do from a distance. Although in his case, he got quite close to the Pakistanis. At which point can I ask him a question?
Of course, please.
So what was Pakistan's artillery response? Because we know that India suffered casualties because some of our gun positions got hit. But how was their response? Because they could identify where you were, the targets. They had those ANTPQ or whatever radars. How effective was their response? And if it wasn't, then what's the reason?
The Pakistan artillery, they had a fair amount of artillery for the defensive, for the walk in this bulge. And I think it caused a lot of damage to us. They were firing to a plan. The first time they opened fire, they destroyed the ammunition dump. Right?
Big one, that fire everybody saw.
The big loss. Next time they opened fire, destroyed the transit camps. And they were dominating the road. And I think more than ANTPQ 37, which were there with the Pakistan, I feel that lots of fire is being directed by the agents inside the territory. Because there's so much fire in the gun positions that we suffered much losses. At one time, next to divot quarters, we put a Bofors battery there. It was on, I think, 9th of 13th, 14th June. That they fired so much there on divot quarters, as also artillery, that we suffered damage, so many Bofors guns and so many personnel. So the artillery was very effective. And we had no way to counter fire at them. You see, unfortunately, we had no these radars with us, like Pakistan, and we were not supposed to cross the LC. So we could not send a commando OPs, we could not fly our air OP squadron flights to direct fire the guns, and they were quite free to fire at us. I think at some stage, I think the ammunition got finished, more than that. So actually, because the logistics was a very tough job for them too. So I think the artillery was caused a lot of damage, a lot of loss of life.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, in my office, General Lakhwinder, when we have the honor of hosting you there, I'll show you that we have a shell splinter from one of the Pakistani guns that was fired. Just to remind us that, you know, Kargil was actually an artillery war. It was artillery duels on both sides. But, you know, Shekhar, the point that you made about the honorable fighting between India and Pakistan, it's a big thing. We don't pay enough attention to that. And one of General Mohinder Puri's officers, in fact, even wrote the citation for one of the Pakistani Karnal Sher, Captain Karnal Sher, who died. He wrote the citation. Brigadier MPS Bajwa, Karnal Sher Khan, the highest award that was given to Pakistan was based on the citation written by an Indian Army officer. And it's almost unprecedented in the 20th century, at least, post the Second World War. But that's the honorable Indian Army for you. That's how we fight wars.
Kargil War, yes, and you would recall, was very phenomenal. Very phenomenal. It was a diversionary attack, not main attack. And on that feature, we made this attack to Providence and the grit of infantry and artillery, and we were able to reach on top. So on that Tiger Hill feature, two amazing things happened. One was that the same commander in the same battle wrote two citations for two people, one from enemy side, Naik Yogendra Yadav, later honorary captain, and one from Colonel Sher Khan from Pakistan, from Nishana Haider. And I don't remember any battle in history where two opposing sides of the same commander have got the highest award of the country. So it was a phenomenal battle and phenomenal, I also think the army ethos ran very good. Look at the army, I think army ethos is like a jeweler. They recognize gold, what is the value of gold. And here was Indian army recognizing bravery of a Pakistan soldier. And they wrote the award.
Absolutely. And in fact, Nitin, we've been talking about armor, artillery, infantry, fire assaults. But there was something else about the Kargil War that was so different, why it's a landmark, that for the first time, you saw war being watched by the Indian people in their living rooms. This was the television war. Tell us about the media's role in this war, how this is a landmark event for the Indian media, the Kargil War.
Well, I think just like everything else, like initially the army blundered into or sort of stumbled into Kargil and Dras, even the media stumbled into Kargil and Dras. And frankly, most of us were confined to the highways. Couple of us tried to go to Batalik, were not allowed to go beyond a certain point. But certainly it played a big role in raising consciousness. Of course, it's called the first televised war, but there were only 3 or 4 television stations at that point in time. I mean, you had this CNN International, you had NDTV, and you had Aaj Tak, I suppose, and Doordarshan. But the equipment, the uplinking facilities were all quite primitive compared to what we have now. And I was with Outlook at that point in time. I was a print reporter. And being in a weekly magazine, I had a greater freedom to travel around much more deeper. And
Did General Lakhwinder while you were there?
Once I met him, he may not remember, but this was like General Mohinder Puri. We met in Matayan first, and then later at Dras, because I was actually living with most of the companies and battalions because I had the luxury of time on my hand. Because the deadlines were not daily, unlike Shekhar's man there, Gaurav Sawant, or my colleague Barkadat.
He had a satellite phone. He had a
satellite phone. Shankarshan Thakur, who we lost yesterday.
I will tell you a story about that satellite phone.
Yes. So in fact, so we were feeling the poor cousins of the satellite phone wielding journalist because we didn't have phones. We had to depend on the military, especially the Dras brigade. Had that PCO meant for the soldiers, so we would sort of sneak in and ask to be called back home. And I had come all the way from Guwahati to report the Kargil War, which was an anomaly. I think rest of the journalist fraternity, my friends were all from Delhi. I was the lone man out who had come from Guwahati. My then editor, Vinod Mehta, one of the finest editors we had, he had called me from Guwahati and sent me there, which I didn't understand at that point in time why. But anyway, I had that lucky chance of going there. So it did change a lot of things as far as the general public is concerned. It also meant that the spirit of the citizens got, I would say, encouraged by what the soldiers were doing, what the reporters were reporting. All that happened. But let me tell you, it wasn't a planned affair either by the army or the military or by the media. We just, like I said, we went there and then started feeling our way.
Stumbled into the conflict.
It was so. I would always think, and I say this in journalism schools and in the military institutions, that the best planned media best planned media operation, if you were to call it that, was 1971, when everything was planned diplomatically, politically, militarily, intelligence-wise, where people were sent into East Pakistan ahead of the war starting. And I think the RNW made great efforts to send Western publications and reporters, sneaking them into East Pakistan, later Bangladesh, with the help of the Mukti Bahinis. It was a planned operation, the media operation. In Kargil, it wasn't so. A lot of people cite Kargil as a great example of military media synergy. I think
Embedded
it's
journalists and
yeah, all that. But I don't think that was the case because I personally experienced it. That everybody. So I kept meeting people at different places. They didn't know who I was, where I was coming from. So in Batalik, when we reached the bridge, and most people will know who have been to Batalik, we were sent back. They said, "You go back to." I said, "I have to go to Leh from here." Because I just wanted to sneak into the battlefield. They said, no, you go back to Kargil and then from there you go to Leh, because that sentry had no orders to let us go there. But Vikramjit Singh, again with Express, he was sent by 15 Corps to sort of look at the battle in Batalik, which was the most underreported battle in that sector. But although they sort of cleared the Pakistanis much ahead of the other two sectors. So in any case, that is how it happens in the fog of war or during the uncertain times. But yes, media did play a role. But I would think let's not label it as the first instance of media military synergy or the best example. It's not.
there's another journalist you've quoted in your book, General Lakhwinder, a friend of mine, Shiv Arur, you've quoted him as when he traveled from the Indian Express, he'd gone to Sweden, and the Bofors engineers told him that they got to know about their gun more from us than from their own military, So that was a big revelation, I'm sure, for you as well. That the combat use of the FH-77.
I also read this Shavaru was saying, and they never planned Bofors to fire so well. And they're quite amazed at it.
That's right. But Shekhar, I'm dying to hear that story of the satellite phone and Gaurav Sawant.
First of all, I have had the privilege, or you can use some other adjective, you can figure out another adjective for the fact that we had in our newsroom both Gaurav Sawant and Shiv Arur at the same time, right? The first job for either of them, the first journalistic job for either of them. That said,
It was my first job too.
That said, Iridium, the satellite phone. Now, we had just heard about satellite phones there, and satellite phones were not legal. So Subhash Chandra, who is a remarkable entrepreneur, because he's done everything for the first time in India, satellite channel for the first time, Disney-style amusement park, SL Park, for the first time. Similarly, he brought in satellite phones for the first time. First of all, we had to get government clearance to be able to use these phones. Second, we couldn't afford these phones. So I called Subhashji and I said, Subhashji, we can't afford these phones, but there's a war going on. The only way we can get the stories across is the use of satellite phones, and only you have these. So he said, तू नहीं दे सकता पैसे तो क्या करेगा? तो मैंने कहा ऐसा है कि पैसे नहीं देंगे, लेकिन हर स्टोरी के नीचे हम एक लाइन लिख देंगे, दिस स्टोरी वाज फाइल्ड यूजिंग एन इरिडियम सैटेलाइट फोन. तो आपका नया प्रोडक्ट है वो मार्केट में इंट्रोड्यूस भी हो जाएगा और ये स्टोरीज तो सब पढ़ेंगे, राइट? So I think this was an innovation that happened at that time. But the real story about the phone is that we had one phone, and Gaurav Sawant went there, and then Vikramjit Singh, who worked with us in Chandigarh, he was sent there because it looked like this was a very large frontier. And then they had to share the same phone. And you know what happens between two reporters when they have one gun to fire from. Then usually one gets the gun, he'll first shoot the other guy with that gun. So there were fights about वो phone ले गया, अब मुझे नजर नहीं आ रहा है, मैं story कैसे file करूँ? So then I called Kanwar Sandhu, who was our editor in Chandigarh. I said, Kanwar, ना दोनों ने ना आपस लड़के मर जाने हैं, right? तो तू जा and you draw the line of control between them and say, you shall be in this area, you shall be in this area, and the Iridium phone will be in your control. So this is crucial equipment, you make sure. So Kanwar Sandhu also went there to keep the peace. Now it so happens that in the middle, Vikramjit at some point thought that he wasn't getting enough action, or that there were too many restrictions being placed on him. So at one point he disappeared, and we were worried as hell. He disappeared for, I think, a couple of days. Kahan gaya hai? And suddenly he appears with a story, and it defies us not to publish it. because he had gone to a zone which was barred to him, which was with the other reporter. But he had gone ahead and he had seen the burial, the only civilian witness to the mass burial of these Pakistani soldiers whose bodies had been left, and he signed as a witness on that burial. So he sent that note also, copied, him signing as a witness to the burial. How would we not carry that story? So there's a complex story around that one iridium phone, ek anar so bimar. And there's a story also of the media there, you're right, that media just got there and nobody realized it was going to be such a complex thing. And once they were there, they were not removed. When the war was not going well, there was pressure to remove them. And I do remember one name I will not mention, the other I will mention. The one name I will not mention because the gentleman is not alive. Who said, the other one I will mention because the gentleman is alive and I've written this also. The first call was, ये अगर 3 दिन और चलेगा तो डिफेंस ऑफ इंडिया रूल्स लग जाएंगे, तुम्हारा सब कुछ सेंसर होगा, इस सबको बंद करो बकवास को, because then stories of casualties were coming every day. Air Force has lost 3 aircraft already. A 4th had been hit but survived, a Canberra photo reconnaissance. So every day there was bad news. The other call was from Major General Ashok Mehta, who's a brother of Vinod Mehta's, a veteran then. He used to work closely with Jaswant Singh. And he said, why are you sending these young fellows to cover this war? Why aren't people like you, editors like you, going to cover the war? Because you know what is what. These youngsters don't know. मैंने कहा सर, वो mountains को लेने के लिए जिस तरह आप 2 स्टार 3 स्टार टाइप लोगों को भेजना शुरू कर दोगे, उस दिन हम एडिटर लोग जाके उसको कवर करना भी शुरू कर देंगे. आप भी तो यंग कैप्टन्स को और मेजर्स को भेजते हैं, तो हम भी यंग रिपोर्टर्स को भेजते हैं. So there was a lot of impatience, but once the battle began to turn, then everybody saw the value in what was coming out and how the country's morale was going up. Because the first month until 12th of June, in fact, that was the night of the India-Pakistan match in London, World Cup at that time. India won that match. That was the night when Tololing fell. And that was the first success and the national mood turned.
Absolutely. And, you know, speaking of the turning of the national mood, I want to quote this excerpt from Nasim Zehra's book, General Lakhwinder. You quoted her in your book as well. She's written this very fine book called From the Kargil to the Coup, and where she writes that on the military front, this Indian artillery fire turned the tables on Pakistan. If the Indian infantry had suffered high casualties until early June, by mid-June, it was raining fire and brimstone onto Pakistani troops occupying posts on Tololing and Tiger Hills. Operation KP, that's Kohe Paima, was facing sharp military reversals and singularly on account of accurate and timely delivery of TNT. The gunners' fire assaults became the principal battle-winning factor. She writes this in her book. So that's, you know, full marks to you and your gunners, General Lakhwinder. You know,
thank you. Thank you very much.
This is huge praise from the other side, and actually it is exactly what unfolded. But, you know, before I hand it back to Major Shah, you've mentioned in your book the fact that, of course, we all know that artillery was the turning point in the Kargil War, but you've also made a pitch for the artillery to be a general arm and not a support arm. Could you just tell our listeners what you mean by that?
The army has different categories of arms and support arms. So the 3 highest ones are the armored corps, the mechanized infantry, and infantry. And artillery, when I was in the earlier days, artillery was towed by the animals of the carts and used, you know, after the assault of the cavalry people or the infantry people at that time. And that was named as support weapon, support system, and rightfully so, because they were not right in front. I think today war has changed. And you can't go by this category. Artillery has a proven decisive arm which can turn the table. You see what happened in Kargil was also being followed in Ukraine. It is an artillery battle. And artillery causes 80% casualties on the enemy, and yet you call it support arm. And Kargil also, with due respect, the battles were planned on infantry, but they were executed around artillery. That artillery fire, when we fired, the enemy said, "Hame bachao, yahan कहर बरस रहा hai." And every time infantry was in trouble, and he sought the artillery's intervention in that, and was very happy the way they were saved in their lives. So I think artillery needs to be seen in a different category. You cannot be going at the old system of the support system. Artillery must and will one fine day will find a place as a main decisive arm in the Indian Army.
On that note, General Lakhwinder, thank you very much, gentlemen, for this very engaging discussion. We could go on all evening, but I'm being told that I'm out of time. So we'll move on to the next part of our discussion. Thank you very much.